The water rushed past with such fury that Clara Calloway thought she could feel the ground trembling beneath her boots. And in that terrifying moment, she understood that the choice she had made to cross the river this morning might very well be the last decision of her 22-year-old life. She had left at dawn, riding her mare across the shallow ford that connected the eastern and western banks of the Salinas River near Paso Robles, California, determined to reach the abandoned homestead where her father had supposedly hidden important documents before his death 6 months ago. The spring of 1876 had been unusually wet, but the morning had dawned clear and bright, giving Clara false confidence that the weather would hold. She had been wrong. The storm that swept down from the mountains arrived with shocking speed, turning the sky black and unleashing a deluge that transformed the gentle river into a raging monster in the span of 2 hours. Now, Clara stood on the eastern bank, her mare lost somewhere upstream after bolting in panic, and watched the brown water churn past carrying entire trees like they were nothing more than twigs. The documents were clutched inside her saddlebag, which she held against her chest like a shield, but they would do her no good if she drowned trying to cross back to town. The water level had risen at least 6 feet, swallowing the rocky ford completely and turning the crossing into a death trap. She looked upstream and down, hoping to spot a bridge or a calmer section of river, but there was nothing. The nearest bridge was 10 miles north, and she would never make it on foot before nightfall. The thought of spending the night alone on this side of the river, with no shelter and no supplies, sent a chill through her body despite the relative warmth of the May afternoon. Clara had been scanning the opposite bank for the better part of an hour when she spotted movement. A figure emerged from the cottonwood trees on the western side, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged in this wild country. Even from across the swollen river, she could tell he was large, powerfully built, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders. He wore buckskin clothing that marked him as a mountain man, one of those solitary trappers and hunters who lived in the high country and came down to the settlements only when necessary. Clara waved her arms frantically, hoping he would see her. For a long moment, he simply stood there, and she wondered if he would just walk away and leave her to her fate. Then he raised one arm in acknowledgement and began moving along the bank, studying the river with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something specific. She watched him stop at a point where a large boulder jutted out into the current, creating a slight eddy in the downstream side. He began removing his outer clothing, stripping down to just his buckskin pants, and even from this distance, Clara could see the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. He tied his shirt and possibles bag to a length of rope, which he secured around his waist, then waded into the water without hesitation. The current hit him immediately, trying to sweep him downstream, but he pushed forward with single-minded determination. His powerful arms cut through the water in strong, steady strokes, angling upstream to compensate for the current's push. Clara held her breath, certain she was about to witness him being swept away, but he kept coming, fighting the river with a strength that seemed almost superhuman. When he finally dragged himself onto the eastern bank 20 yards downstream from where Clara stood, she ran to meet him, her boots squelching in the mud. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had imagined. Water streamed from his hair and body, and his chest heaved with exertion, but his dark eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in her bedraggled appearance. "Thank God," Clara gasped. "I thought I was going to be stuck here all night." "You would have been stuck here a lot longer than that," he said, his voice a deep rumble that carried easily over the roar of the river. "This storm is going to last for days. The water will keep rising." He studied her for a moment, taking in her mud-splattered riding dress and the saddlebag she clutched. "You got anything you cannot leave behind?" "Just this bag," Clara said, holding it up, "and I need to get back to Paso Robles." He nodded, his expression serious. "I'm going to tie this rope around both of us. The current is going to try to rip us apart, but you hold on to me no matter what happens. You understand?" "Yes," Clara said, though fear made her voice shake. "What is your name?" he asked as he began securing the rope around her waist, his large hands working with surprising deftness. "Clara Calloway." "I am Ryder Anderson," he said, "and I'm going to get you across this river, Clara, but you have to trust me completely. When we get in that water, you are going to be terrified, but you cannot panic. Can you do that?" Clara looked into his eyes and saw something there that steadied her. Confidence, capability, a strength that went beyond just physical power. I can do that. He tied her saddlebag to the rope as well, then positioned himself in front of her. Put your arms around my neck and hold on tight. Do not let go for any reason. She wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid warmth of his skin still heated from exertion despite the cold water. He was at least a foot taller than her, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the view of the river ahead. His arms came around her, lifting her slightly so her feet barely touched the ground, and then he was moving toward the water. The cold hit her like a physical blow when they entered the river, stealing her breath and making her muscles seize. The current grabbed at them immediately, trying to tear her away from Ryder, but his arms tightened around her with crushing strength. She pressed her face against his neck, feeling his pulse beating steady and strong, and held on with everything she had. The world became a chaos of rushing water and terrifying motion. They were being swept downstream despite Ryder's powerful swimming, but he kept angling toward the western bank with grim determination. Water washed over Clara's head, filling her mouth and nose, and she choked and gasped, certain they were both going to drown. But Ryder never faltered. His legs kicked with machine-like regularity, his arms never loosening their protective hold on her body. A submerged log slammed into them, nearly tearing them apart, but Ryder twisted his body to take the impact, grunting with pain but never releasing her. Clara felt the rope around her waist go taut, dragging at them, but it held. They were more than halfway across now, though they had been carried at least 100 yards downstream. "Almost there," Ryder gasped in her ear. "Hold on." His feet found purchase on the bottom, and suddenly they were wading rather than swimming, fighting through waist-deep current toward the bank. Clara's legs had turned to jelly, unable to support her weight, but Ryder simply lifted her higher and kept moving, his muscles straining with the effort of carrying her and fighting the water simultaneously. Then they were out, collapsing together onto the muddy bank, both of them coughing and gasping for air. Clara's entire body shook with cold and shock, her teeth chattering so hard she bit her tongue. Ryder rolled to his feet almost immediately, though she could see the effort it cost him, and began untying the rope. "We need to get you warm," he said. "My cabin is about a mile from here. Can you walk?" Clara tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Without a word, Ryder scooped her up in his arms as though she weighed nothing, settling her against his chest with one arm under her knees and the other supporting her back. He retrieved his bundled clothing and her saddlebag with one hand, then set off through the trees at a ground-eating pace that seemed impossible given what he had just been through. "You saved my life," Clara managed to say through her chattering teeth. "You would have done the same for me," Ryder said, though they both knew that was not true. Clara could never have swum that river, could never have carried another person across. What he had just done required strength and skill far beyond what most men possessed. The cabin appeared through the trees, a solid structure built of logs with a stone chimney at one end. Ryder kicked the door open and carried Clara inside, setting her down on a chair near the cold fireplace. He moved with swift efficiency, building up the fire until flames crackled and heat began to fill the small space. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, pulling a thick wool blanket from a chest in the corner. "I will turn my back, but you need to do it now before you catch pneumonia." Clara's fingers were so numb she could barely work the buttons of her riding dress, but she managed to strip down to her chemise and drawers, which were also soaked through. Modesty warred with practicality, and practicality won. She peeled off the remaining garments and wrapped herself in the blanket, which smelled of wood smoke and pine. "I am decent," she said. Ryder turned around, and for a moment something flickered in his dark eyes as he looked at her wrapped in the blanket with her wet hair hanging in tangles around her shoulders. Then he moved to the chest again and pulled out one of his own shirts, a soft flannel that would be enormous on her. "Put this on under the blanket," he said, handing it to her. "I will hang your clothes by the fire to dry." He busied himself with stoking the fire and setting up a makeshift drying rack while Clara struggled into the shirt. It fell to her knees and she had to roll the sleeves up several times, but it was dry and warm and it smelled like him. Something about that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with her recent ordeal. When she emerged from the blanket, now wearing his shirt with the blanket draped over her shoulders like a shawl, Ryder was putting a pot of water on to boil. He had changed into dry buckskins and tied his long hair back, revealing a face that was all hard angles and weathered tan. There was a fresh bruise blooming on his left shoulder where the log had hit him. You are hurt, Clara said. He glanced at his shoulder dismissively. I have had worse. Let me look at it. It is fine. You saved my life, Clara said firmly. The least I can do is make sure you have not broken anything. For a moment she thought he would refuse, but then he gave a small shrug and sat down on the chair, turning so she could see his shoulder. Clara moved closer, the blanket falling away, acutely aware that she was standing next to this near stranger wearing nothing but his shirt. But he had carried her through a raging river, had risked his own life for hers, and somehow that created an intimacy that transcended normal propriety. She touched his shoulder gently, feeling the solid muscle beneath warm skin. He flinched slightly but did not pull away. The bruise was ugly, but the bone seemed intact and she could find no sign of serious damage. I think you were lucky, she said. Nothing appears to be broken. Luck had nothing to do with it, Ryder said. I have thick bones. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. Thank you for coming to get me. I do not know how long I would have lasted out there. You would have figured something out, Ryder said, though they both knew that was generous. He stood and moved back to the fire, where the water was beginning to steam. You want some coffee? That sounds wonderful. They sat in companionable silence while the coffee brewed, the storm continuing to rage outside. The cabin was warm and dry and solid, clearly built by someone who knew what he was doing. The furnishings were simple but well made. A rough table, 2 chairs, a rope bed in one corner covered with furs, shelves holding supplies and tools. Traps and snowshoes hung on the walls, along with a rifle and several knives. It was the home of a man who lived alone and preferred it that way. How long have you lived here? Clara asked. About 5 years, Ryder said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. I came out from Missouri after the war, did some prospecting, some trapping. Eventually I ended up here. He handed her a cup. What were you doing on the wrong side of the river? Clara cupped the hot coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her still cold hands. My father died 6 months ago. Before he passed, he told me he had hidden some documents at our old homestead, papers that proved our land claim. My stepmother has been trying to sell the property out from under me, claiming my father left it to her, but these documents prove otherwise. She gestured to her saddlebag, which was dripping by the fire. I had to get them before she found them and destroyed them. Your stepmother sounds like a difficult woman. That is putting it mildly, Clara said with feeling. She married my father 2 years ago, after my mother died. I think she always planned to take everything once he was gone. She has already sold off most of the cattle and the good horses. The land is all I have left. Ryder studied her over his coffee cup. You live alone with her? No, I have a room at the boarding house in Paso Robles. I work at the general store to pay for it. My stepmother made it clear I was not welcome in what she considers her house. You should have brought someone with you to get those papers. There was no one to bring, Clara said quietly. My father was not a popular man. He made enemies, and I did not want to wait long enough for my stepmother to realize what I was doing. The storm continued through the afternoon and into the evening, the rain hammering on the roof with relentless intensity. Ryder made a simple supper of beans and salt pork, and they ate sitting by the fire while the light faded outside. Clara found herself studying him in the flickering firelight, taking in the way his hands moved with easy competence as he ate, the way his eyes constantly flicked to the windows and door, always aware of his surroundings. Were you a soldier? She asked. You mentioned the war. Something shuddered in his expression. I was. Missouri cavalry, fighting for the Union. It was ugly, brother against brother. When it ended, I had no interest in going back to what was left. Do you have family there? Had, Ryder said. My parents died during the war. Sickness, not battle. My brother was killed at Wilson's Creek. I have some cousins still, I suppose, but we were never close. He refilled his coffee cup. What about you? Any family besides your stepmother? None, Clara said. My mother was an only child, and her parents died before I was born. My father had a brother, but they had a falling out years ago, and I have never met him. It has just been me for a long time now. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with shared loneliness. 2 people who had ended up in this wild country with no ties to bind them, no family to anchor them, just trying to survive in a hard land. You can take the bed, Ryder said after a while. I will sleep on the floor. I cannot take your bed, Clara protested. You are the one who just swam a river, twice. I have slept on worse than a wood floor, Ryder said in a tone that brooked no argument. You will take the bed. Clara was too exhausted to argue further. The events of the day had caught up with her, and suddenly she could barely keep her eyes open. Ryder banked the fire while she crawled under the heavy furs on his bed, still wearing his flannel shirt. The bed smelled like him, pine and leather and wood smoke, and she found the scent oddly comforting. She woke once in the night to the sound of the storm still raging, and saw Ryder stretched out on the floor near the fire, wrapped in a blanket, one arm pillowing his head. Even in sleep he looked alert, ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. Clara watched him for a long moment, this stranger who had risked everything to save her, then drifted back to sleep feeling safer than she had in months. The storm did not break for 3 days. Ryder had been right about that. The rain continued with monotonous fury, and the river remained high and dangerous, making any attempt at crossing suicidal. Clara found herself stranded in the cabin with a man she barely knew, wearing his clothes, eating his food, sharing his space in a way that would have been scandalous under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances, and Clara discovered that she did not mind being stranded with Ryder Anderson. He was quiet but not unfriendly, competent in a way that made her feel secure and surprisingly easy to talk to once he opened up. They spent long hours by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his years in the mountains, about tracking bears and cougars, about winters so harsh he had gone weeks without seeing another human being. She told him about growing up in Sacramento, about her mother's gentle nature and her father's hard edges, about the dreams she had once had of going back east to school. What stopped you? Ryder asked. Reality, Clara said simply. My father lost money in bad investments. Then my mother got sick. Then there was the war, and everything fell apart. By the time things settled, I was too old and too poor for school. I came to Paso Robles with my father because he thought he could start over here. That was 4 years ago. On the second day, Ryder went out to check his trap lines despite the rain, returning several hours later soaked and cold but carrying 2 rabbits and a grouse. Clara watched him skin and prepare the game with swift, practiced movements, his large hands working with surprising delicacy. That night they had roasted meat and wild onions, a feast compared to the simple meals of the previous days. You are a good cook, Clara said, savoring the tender meat. I have had a lot of practice feeding myself, Ryder replied. You learn quick when the alternative is going hungry. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Clara found herself studying his hands again. They were large and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had, but there was a gentleness in them that surprised her. When he had carried her from the river, those hands had held her with care despite their strength. When he handed her a cup of coffee, his fingers brushed hers with unexpected softness. Can I ask you something? Clara said. You can ask. Why did you come to get me? You did not know me. You could have just waved and walked away, left me to figure it out on my own. Ryder was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I could not do that, he said finally. I have seen too many people die in stupid, preventable ways. During the war, after the war. If I can stop it from happening, I do. Even if it puts you at risk? Even then. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She had known cruel men and weak men and selfish men. Her father had been hard and distant, her stepmother's various suitors grasping and false. But here was a man who risked his life for a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do, who asked for nothing in return, who treated her with a respect and gentleness she had rarely experienced. You are a good man, Ryder Anderson, she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his dark eyes made her breath catch. I'm not sure about that, he said, but I try. On the third night, Clara woke to find the storm had finally broken. Moonlight streamed through the window, and the silence after days of constant rain was almost shocking. She sat up in bed and saw Ryder standing at the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the pale light. The rain stopped, she said unnecessarily. About an hour ago, Ryder confirmed. The river will start to drop by morning. You will be able to cross in a day or two. A day or two. Clara should have been relieved, should have been eager to return to town and file her claim with the documents in her saddlebag. Instead, she felt a strange reluctance and unwillingness to leave this warm cabin and the man who had saved her life. "I suppose I should let you get back to your life," she said. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Ryder turned from the window, his face half in shadow. "You have not imposed. I have enjoyed the company. Even though I forced you to give up your bed. Even then." He moved closer, and in the moonlight, Clara could see the bruise on his shoulder had faded to yellow and green. "Are you all right, Clara? Really all right?" The question surprised her. Most men would have stopped caring once the immediate danger passed, but Ryder was asking about more than just her physical well-being. He wanted to know if she was dealing with the fear, the shock, the closeness of death she had experienced in that river. "I have nightmares," she admitted, "about the water, about drowning. But then I wake up and I am here, and I am safe, and I remember that you pulled me out of that river. So yes, I'm all right." Ryder sat down on the edge of the bed, the rope frame creaking under his weight. They were very close now, close enough that Clara could see the faint scars on his face and hands, the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "I have nightmares too," he said quietly. "About the war mostly, about the men I killed and the men I could not save. They do not ever really go away." Without thinking, Clara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were calloused and warm, and they closed around hers with gentle strength. They sat like that for a long moment, two damaged people finding comfort in simple human contact, and Clara felt something bloom in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in years. Hope, connection, the possibility that she might not have to face the world alone. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Ryder lifted her hand and pressed it briefly to his lips, a gesture so old-fashioned and tender that it brought tears to Clara's eyes. Then he released her and stood, moving back toward his makeshift bed on the floor. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow I will check the river." But Clara could not sleep. She lay in the darkness listening to Ryder's breathing, thinking about his words, his touch, the way he looked at her like she mattered. She had spent so long feeling invisible, dismissed by her father and hated by her stepmother, just another store clerk in a dusty frontier town. But when Ryder looked at her, she felt seen, valued, maybe even cherished. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the world washed clean by the storm. They walked down to the river together, and Clara's heart sank when she saw the water still running high and brown, though noticeably lower than it had been during the flood. "Another day," Ryder said. "Maybe two, then it will be safe to cross." They spent that day in quiet domesticity. Ryder went hunting again and returned with a small deer, which he butchered with efficient skill. Clara helped where she could, though she was acutely aware of her own uselessness compared to his competence. Her skills lay in keeping ledgers and measuring fabric, not surviving in the wilderness. "You are good at what you do," Ryder said, as though reading her thoughts. "I could not run a store any more than you could track a deer. We all have our strengths." "But your strengths kept you alive," Clara pointed out. "Mine just helped other people buy calico and coffee." "Do not underestimate that," Ryder said seriously. "Civilization needs storekeepers as much as it needs hunters, maybe more. You are the ones who build communities, who create the ties that bind people together. I just hide in the mountains." "You do not seem like the hiding type." He smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "Maybe hiding is the wrong word. Waiting, perhaps." "Waiting for what?" Ryder did not answer, but the way he looked at her made Clara's pulse quicken. That evening, her clothes were finally dry enough to wear, though they were stiff and stained from river mud. Clara changed into her riding dress reluctantly, sorry to give up the comfortable softness of Ryder's flannel shirt. When she emerged from behind the curtain he had rigged for her privacy, she found him staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "You just look different in a dress." "Is that bad?" "No," Ryder said quietly. "Not bad at all." They sat by the fire after supper, and the conversation turned to the future. Clara talked about her plans to file her land claim, to fight her stepmother in court if necessary, to somehow build a life for herself despite having almost no money and no family to help her. "What will you do with the land if you win it?" Ryder asked. "I do not know," Clara admitted. "Sell it, probably. Use the money to start over somewhere else. There is nothing for me in Paso Robles except bad memories. Where would you go? I have not decided. Maybe San Francisco. Maybe back to Sacramento. Somewhere with opportunities for a woman alone. She looked at him across the fire. What about you? Will you stay here? Ryder poked at the log, sending up a shower of sparks. I've been thinking about that lately. This is a good place to be alone, but I'm not sure I want to be alone anymore. Clara's heart began to beat faster. What would you want instead? A partner, Ryder said simply. Someone to share the work and the silence and the long winters. Someone to make it all mean something. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart, should remember that she had only known this man for 4 days. But 4 days of living in close quarters, of shared fears and shared meals and shared silences, had taught her more about Ryder Anderson than years of casual acquaintance could have done. She knew he was kind and brave and strong. She knew he treated her like an equal, despite the vast difference in their capabilities. She knew that when he looked at her, she felt something she had never felt before, desired, not for what she could provide or what she represented, but simply for herself. I think I could be that person, she said quietly. Ryder looked up sharply, his dark eyes searching her face. You do not know what you would be taking on. This life is hard, Clara, lonely and dangerous and harder than working in a store. You would be giving up a lot. I would be gaining more, Clara said. She moved around the fire to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I have been alone my whole life, Ryder, even when I was surrounded by people. My mother loved me, but she was sick for so long she did not have the energy to really see me. My father thought I was a burden. My stepmother hates me. The people in town are polite, but they do not care if I live or die. She turned to face him fully. But you risked your life to save mine. You took care of me when you could have just gotten me across the river and sent me on my way. You treat me like I matter. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Ryder's hand came up to cup her face, his calloused palm rough against her cheek. You do matter, he said fiercely. You matter more than you know. Then he was kissing her, a tentative brush of lips that quickly deepened into something urgent and hungry. Clara's arms went around his neck, her fingers tangling in his long hair, and she kissed him back with all the loneliness and longing she had carried for so long. His arms encircled her, lifting her onto his lap, and she felt the solid strength of his body against hers, the heat of him burning through the layers of clothing between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. I do not want you to leave, he said roughly. I know that is selfish. I know you have a life in town, but I do not want to let you go. Then do not, Clara whispered. I have nothing in that town except a rented room and a job measuring ribbon. Everything I want is right here. You have not thought this through. I have thought about nothing else for the past 2 days. Clara pulled back so she could look into his eyes. I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And I do not want to walk away from that just because it is not proper or sensible. I have been proper and sensible my whole life, and it has gotten me nothing but loneliness. Ryder's arms tightened around her. Are you sure? Because if you stay, Clara, I am not going to let you go. I will build you a house and fill it with children and love you until the day I die. But you have to be sure. I am sure, Clara said, and kissed him again to prove it. They sat by the fire for hours, talking about the future in a way that felt both impossible and inevitable. Ryder told her about the land he had claimed further up in the mountains, good grazing land with a creek running through it, where he had always planned to build a ranch someday when he found the right reason. Clara told him about her dreams of a real home, a place where she belonged, children running through rooms filled with love and laughter instead of the cold silence she had grown up with. I do not have much money, Ryder admitted. I have been saving, but it's not a lot. It will be years before we have a working ranch. I will have money once I settle my land claim, Clara said. We can use that to buy cattle, hire help, build a future together. Our future, Ryder said, as though testing the words. Then he smiled, that rare transformative smile that made Clara's heart flip over. I like the sound of that. That night, Clara insisted Ryder share the bed with her, and he did not argue. They lay together on top of the furs, fully clothed, but wrapped in each other's arms, talking in whispers until exhaustion finally claimed them both. Clara fell asleep with her head on Ryder's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and did not have any nightmares about drowning. The next morning the river had dropped enough to be passable, though it was still higher and faster than normal. They packed up Clara's saddlebag and the few supplies Ryder wanted to bring, then walked down to the water together hand in hand. "I can carry you again," Ryder offered, but Clara shook her head. "We cross together," she said. "Partners from now on." They waded into the river side by side, Ryder keeping one powerful arm around her waist to steady her against the current. The water was cold and strong, but nothing like the raging flood that had nearly killed them both. They made it across without incident, emerging on the western bank dripping but triumphant. The walk into Paso Robles took most of the day. The town was in chaos when they arrived, with flooding damage everywhere and people working frantically to clean up debris and repair buildings. The livery stable had lost part of its roof, the main street was a river of mud, and several businesses displayed broken windows. Clara went straight to the land office, where a harried clerk looked at her documents with bleary eyes. "Your stepmother was here yesterday," he said. "Claimed you had been swept away in the flood and wanted to file for complete ownership based on your death." Clara felt a cold fury settle over her. "As you can see, I am not dead, and I have the original deed and my father's will right here." The clerk examined the papers carefully, comparing them to documents in his files. "Everything appears to be in order. I will file these immediately. Your stepmother's claim is void." "Thank you," Clara said with feeling. They left the land office and headed for the boarding house, where Clara needed to collect her few belongings and settle her account. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor, was delighted to see her alive and did not even charge her for the final week when Clara explained she was leaving. "Moving on to better things," Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing smile, looking at Ryder, who stood waiting patiently in the hallway. "That's a good man you have there, Miss Clara. I can always tell." "Yes," Clara agreed. "He is." Her stepmother was harder to face. The woman lived in the house that had been Clara's childhood home, a modest clapboard structure on the edge of town. When Clara knocked on the door with Ryder at her side, she saw her stepmother's face go pale with shock and rage. "You!" the woman hissed. "I heard you drowned." "Sorry to disappoint you," Clara said coldly. "I came to tell you that I have filed my land claim and it has been approved. The property is legally mine. You have 1 week to vacate the premises." "Your father would never have wanted this," her stepmother spat. "He would have wanted me to have that land." "My father wanted me to have it, which is why he hid the deed where only I would think to look," Clara said. "You can contest it in court if you like, but you will lose and you know it. Take what you can carry and go. If you are still here in a week, I will have the sheriff remove you." She turned and walked away without waiting for a response, feeling lighter than she had in years. Ryder fell into step beside her, his hand finding hers, and they walked together through the muddy streets toward the edge of town where his horse was stabled. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara and Ryder worked together to transform the land claim into something that could be sold. They hired men to repair the damaged buildings, rounded up the cattle her stepmother had not yet sold, and made the property presentable to potential buyers. A rancher from San Luis Obispo made a generous offer, and Clara accepted immediately. With the money from the sale, combined with Ryder's savings, they had enough to start building their future. They traveled up into the mountains to the land Ryder had claimed, and Clara fell in love with it immediately. The creek ran clear and cold through a meadow surrounded by pine forest, with a view of the distant peaks that took her breath away. "We will build the house here," Ryder said, pointing to a rise that would protect them from flooding. "Face it south for the winter sun. Put the barn down by the creek where the animals can water easily." "A big house," Clara added, "with room for children." Ryder pulled her into his arms, his eyes warm. "How many children are we talking about?" "As many as God sees fit to give us," Clara said, then laughed at his expression. "Does that frighten you?" "Nothing about you frightens me," Ryder said, and kissed her thoroughly to prove it. They were married in June of 1876, a simple ceremony at the church in Paso Robles, with Mrs. Henderson and the store owner as witnesses. Clara wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric purchased with her employee discount, and Ryder wore new buckskins that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ryder lifted Clara off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. The first year was hard. They lived in a tent while Ryder built their house, working from dawn to dusk, cutting logs and raising walls. Clara learned to cook over an open fire, to help lift beams into place, to measure and saw and hammer alongside her husband. Her hands became calloused, her skin tanned, her body strong from the constant physical labor. She had never been happier. The house took shape slowly, a sturdy log structure with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above. Ryder built a massive stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the mountain winters, and Clara made curtains from cheap muslin and braided rugs from scraps of fabric. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, built with their own hands, and when they finally moved in on a crisp October evening, Clara felt like she had finally found the home she'd been searching for all her life. Their first son was born in May of 1877, a healthy baby with his father's dark eyes and powerful lungs. They named him Robert, and Ryder held him with a tenderness that made Clara's heart ache. She watched her husband become a father and fell even more deeply in love with him, seeing the gentle way he cradled their son, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the wonder on his face as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "I never thought I would have this," Ryder said softly, gazing down at the baby sleeping in his massive hands. "A family, a real home, someone to love and protect." "We will protect each other," Clara said, leaning against his shoulder. "That is what family does." The ranch grew slowly. They started with 20 head of cattle purchased with the last of Clara's land money, then gradually built the herd through careful breeding and wise purchases. Ryder proved to have a gift for working with animals, training horses that other men had given up on, nursing sick cattle back to health, reading the weather and the land with uncanny accuracy. Clara handled the business side, keeping the books, negotiating sales, making sure they did not overextend themselves. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine, arrived in the spring of 1879. She had Clara's light hair and Ryder's stubborn determination, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her father everywhere, insisting on helping with every task no matter how difficult or dangerous. Ryder doted on her shamelessly, carving her wooden dolls and teaching her to ride almost before she could talk. Another son came in 1881, then twin girls in 1883. The house that had seemed so spacious when they built it suddenly felt small with 5 children running through it, and Ryder added on 2 more rooms and a proper porch. Clara planted a garden that provided vegetables through the summer and fall, learned to preserve food for the long winters, and discovered that she had a talent for healing after successfully treating a neighbor's child for fever. Life settled into a rhythm. Summers were spent working the ranch, moving cattle to high pasture, cutting hay, making repairs. Falls were frantic with harvest and preparations for winter. Winters were long and quiet, the family isolated by deep snow, but those months were Clara's favorite. They would gather by the fire in the evenings, Ryder telling stories to the children while Clara mended clothes or worked on her knitting, the wind howling outside, but the house warm and safe within. One winter evening, when the twins were 5 and little Robert was learning to read, Clara sat watching her family and felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Ryder looked up from the horse figurine he was carving for Catherine and saw her expression. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "I was just thinking," Clara said, "about that day by the river, about how close I came to dying alone and scared. And now I have all this." She gestured to the children sprawled around the fire, to the house Ryder had built with his own hands, to the life they had created together. "Sometimes I can barely believe it is real." Ryder set down his carving and crossed to her side, pulling her against him. "It is real," he said into her hair. "This is our life, our family, everything we fought for." "I love you," Clara whispered. "I do not think I tell you that enough." "You tell me every day," Ryder said, "in 1,000 different ways. I see it in the way you care for our children, in the meals you cook and the clothes you mend, in the way you stand beside me when times are hard. I know you love me, Clara. I have always known." She tilted her face up to kiss him, and he responded with the same passion he had shown that first night in his cabin all those years ago. Some things never changed. The desire between them had never faded, never become mundane or routine. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by years of partnership and shared struggle and the bone-deep knowledge that they belonged together. The children grew. Robert proved to have his father's gift with animals and his mother's head for business, and everyone assumed he would take over the ranch someday. Catherine wanted to be a doctor after watching her mother heal the sick, and Clara and Ryder supported her ambitions, even though it meant she would have to go east for training. The younger children were still finding their paths, but Clara had no doubt they would all grow into capable, loving adults. She and Ryder had given them something neither of them had experienced as children, a home filled with love and stability, where they knew they were wanted and valued. In 1890, the ranch was prosperous enough that they could afford to hire steady help. They brought on 2 cowboys to handle the day-to-day work, which gave Ryder and Clara more time to focus on their family. They took trips into town more often, attended church socials, became pillars of the small community that had grown up around Paso Robles. People looked at them with respect and a little bit of awe. This couple who had built something lasting out of nothing, who clearly adored each other after 14 years of marriage, whose children were well-behaved and happy. "Do you ever regret it?" Ryder asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains. "Giving up the chance to live in a city, to have an easier life?" Clara looked at him in surprise. "Never, not once. This is everything I ever wanted. Even though it was hard, even though there were times we barely had enough to eat?" "Especially because of that," Clara said. "We built this together, Ryder. Every log in that house, every head of cattle, every child. It is ours in a way that nothing could be if we had not fought for it." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "The best things in life are never easy. You taught me that." Ryder raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You're the best thing in my life," he said quietly. "You and our children. Everything else is just details." In the summer of 1895, they celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary by taking their first real trip together without the children. Robert, now 18 and fully capable of running the ranch, promised to keep everyone alive and out of trouble while they were gone. Ryder and Clara rode into the high country, just the 2 of them on horseback, carrying camping gear and a week's worth of supplies. They followed old game trails up into territory Ryder had not visited since his trapping days, sleeping under the stars and making love on beds of pine boughs like newlyweds. Clara felt 22 again, young and free, though her body showed the marks of bearing 5 children and working a ranch for nearly 2 decades. Ryder's hair was starting to gray at the temples, and he moved a little more carefully than he once had. But to Clara, he was still the powerful, magnificent man who had swum a raging river to save her life. On their last night before heading home, they camped beside a high mountain lake that reflected the stars like polished silver. Ryder built up the fire, and they sat close together, sharing warmth in the cool mountain air. "Do you remember what you said to me that night in your cabin?" Clara asked. "About waiting?" "I remember. What were you waiting for?" Ryder was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "You," he said finally. "I was waiting for you. I just did not know it until you were standing on the wrong side of that river." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "I think I was waiting for you too. I spent so many years feeling lost, like I did not quite fit anywhere. Then I met you and suddenly everything made sense. We found each other," Ryder said simply. "That's all that matters." They made love by the fire with the same passion and tenderness that had always defined their relationship, then slept wrapped in each other's arms as the stars wheeled overhead. In the morning, they rode back down to the ranch, back to their children and their responsibilities and the life they had built, and Clara felt a deep sense of peace. She had everything she needed, everything she had ever wanted. The years continued to pass. Catherine went east to medical school in 1897, and Clara cried for a week after she left. But she returned every summer, full of stories about her classes and the amazing things she was learning, and eventually Clara stopped worrying that her daughter would never come home. Robert married a local girl in 1899, a sweet-natured young woman who fit into the family perfectly, and Clara watched her son become a husband with the same bittersweet joy she had felt watching him learn to walk. The twins proved to have their mother's business sense, and in 1900 they opened a general store in town using money they had saved from working the ranch. Clara helped them set up the books and advised them on inventory, proud beyond measure that her daughters were building something for themselves. The youngest son decided he wanted to be a lawyer, and Ryder sold 20 head of cattle to pay for his education without a single complaint. In the spring of 1901, Robert and his wife presented Ryder and Clara with their first grandchild, a healthy boy with the family's dark eyes and a shock of black hair. Ryder held his grandson with the same wonder he had shown holding his own children, and Clara watched her husband become a grandfather and loved him even more. They were sitting on the porch one evening in the summer of 1902, watching Robert's son toddle around the yard under his mother's watchful eye, when Ryder turned to Clara with a thoughtful expression. "We did good," he said. "We did," Clara agreed. 5 children, all of them healthy and happy and making their own way in the world. A ranch that provides for everyone. Grandchildren. He shook his head in wonder. "When I pulled you out of that river, I never imagined it would lead to all this." "I did," Clara said with a smile. "Well, maybe not the specific details, but I knew that day that my life had changed, that I had found something worth holding on to. Worth swimming a river for. Worth swimming 100 rivers for." Clara leaned against his shoulder, fitting against him as perfectly as she had that first night in his cabin 26 years ago. "Thank you for coming to get me, Ryder. Thank you for not leaving me on the wrong side." Ryder's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm and safe. "Thank you for letting me carry you home," he said quietly. "Thank you for staying." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The ranch spread out before them, everything they had built together through hard work and determination and love. Clara could hear the children playing, could smell supper cooking inside the house, could feel the steady beat of Ryder's heart under her palm. This was home. This was family. This was everything she had been searching for during all those lonely years before the flood, before the river, before a mountain man with dark eyes and powerful shoulders had risked everything to save her life. She had been stuck on the wrong side, lost and alone and frightened. And then Ryder Anderson had swum across and carried her back over, not just across a swollen river, but across the divide between loneliness and love, between surviving and truly living. He had given her a home and a family and a future, and in return, she had given him the same. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful that would last long after they were gone, living on in their children and their children's children. A legacy of love built on the foundation of one man's courage and one woman's faith. As the stars began to appear overhead and the mountain air cooled around them, Clara took Ryder's hand and squeezed it gently. He squeezed back, a simple gesture that said everything words could not. Then they rose and walked into their house together, to the family and the life they had created, to the home that love had built. The ranch continued to thrive through the first decade of the new century. Robert proved to be an even better rancher than his father, expanding their holdings and introducing modern cattle breeding techniques that increased both the quantity and quality of their herd. Catherine established a medical practice in Paso Robles after finishing her training, becoming one of the first female doctors in California, and married a fellow physician who shared her passion for helping others. The twin store became the largest mercantile in the county, and their youngest son opened a law office in San Luis Obispo that quickly gained a reputation for honest dealing and skilled representation. Ryder and Clara gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, spending more time with their growing number of grandchildren and enjoying the fruits of their decades of labor. They traveled occasionally, visiting San Francisco and even making one trip to Sacramento where Clara showed Ryder the places of her childhood. But they always returned to the mountain ranch with relief, to the house Ryder had built and the land they had tamed together. On a warm spring evening in 1912, as they celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch. All 5 children came with their spouses and children, filling the house to bursting with noise and laughter and love. They roasted a steer and made music and danced under the stars, and Clara watched it all with tears streaming down her face. Happy tears, she assured Ryder when he wiped them away with gentle fingers. I'm just overwhelmed by how blessed we are. We worked for it, Ryder said. Every bit of it. We earned this happiness. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Ryder and Clara walked down to the creek together. The water ran clear and peaceful, nothing like the raging torrent that had brought them together so many years ago. They sat on the bank side by side, holding hands and listening to the soft gurgle of the current. Do you ever think about that day? Clara asked. The storm and the river and how scared I was? Sometimes, Ryder admitted. I think about how easy it would have been to just keep walking, to tell myself it was not my problem, that you would figure something out. I think about how different my life would be if I had made that choice. I think about it too, Clara said. I think about how close I came to giving up. I was so tired and so cold, and the water looked so impossible to cross. I almost decided to just sit down and wait to die. Ryder's hand tightened on hers. I'm glad you did not. I'm glad you came for me, Clara said. She turned to face him, seeing the silver in his hair and the lines time had carved into his face, and loved him more than she had thought possible to love another person. You gave me everything, Ryder. A home, a family, a purpose. You made me believe I was worth saving. You were always worth saving, Ryder said fiercely. Always. From the moment I saw you standing on that bank, scared but not broken, I knew you were someone special, someone worth fighting for. We fought for each other, Clara said, and we won. They sat by the creek until the moon rose high overhead, talking about the past and the future, about their children and grandchildren, about all the years they had shared and all the years still to come. When they finally walked back to the house hand in hand, Clara felt the same sense of rightness she had felt that first night in Ryder's cabin. They belonged together. They always had. The seasons turned, and the years passed. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with young voices and bright laughter. Ryder's hair turned fully silver, and his powerful body finally began to show the effects of decades of hard physical labor, but his eyes remained sharp, and his love for Clara never wavered. Clara's hands became gnarled with arthritis, and she moved more slowly than she once had, but her mind stayed keen, and her devotion to her family never faltered. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1916 with a party that brought friends and family from across California. The twins had insisted on organizing everything, and they transformed the ranch into something magical with lanterns strung through the trees and tables groaning under the weight of food and drink. Ryder and Clara danced together as a fiddle played, moving with the ease of long practice, and everyone watched them with expressions that ranged from admiration to envy. 40 years, Clara said as they swayed together. Can you believe it? Every single one of them worth it, Ryder replied. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. Those are what made us strong. In 1920, Robert and his wife took over complete ownership of the ranch, though Ryder and Clara continued to live in the house he had built all those years ago. They spent their days on the porch watching the ranch operate around them, entertaining visiting grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company after a lifetime of hard work. One evening in late summer, as the sun set over the mountains painting the sky in brilliant colors, Ryder turned to Clara with a soft smile. I have been thinking, he said. Always dangerous, Clara teased. I want to take you back up to that high mountain lake, Ryder said. One more time. Just you and me, like we used to do. Clara studied his face, seeing the determination there despite his 70 years. Are you sure you're up for it? I can still sit a horse, Ryder said with dignity, and I want to see it again, with you. So they made the trip one last time, moving slowly but steadily up the old trails into the high country. Robert tried to insist on coming with them, but Ryder refused, saying some things were meant to be private. They camped beside the lake for 3 nights, swimming in the cold water during the heat of the day and making love under the stars at night with the same tenderness and passion that had always defined their relationship. On their last morning, Clara woke early and watched the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. Ryder slept beside her, his breathing deep and even, and she studied his face with the attention of someone memorizing something precious. The dark hair was silver now, the skin weathered and lined, but he was still her mountain man, still the strong and capable man who had risked everything to save her life. "I love you," she whispered, not wanting to wake him but needing to say the words. "I will love you forever." Ryder's eyes opened, and he smiled at her with such warmth that her breath caught. "Forever is a long time." "Not long enough," Clara said. They rode back down to the ranch the next day, tired but content, and resumed their peaceful life. The years continued to pass, each one a gift they did not take for granted. They watched their grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. They celebrated each birthday and anniversary with gratitude for another year together. They held hands on the porch every evening and talked about everything and nothing, the way they always had. In the spring of 1926, exactly 50 years after they had married, the family threw them a golden anniversary party that brought people from across the state. The governor sent a telegram congratulating them, and the local newspaper ran a long article about the couple who had helped build the California ranch country. Ryder and Clara accepted the attention with grace, but were clearly relieved when everyone finally went home and they could return to their quiet routine. 50 years, Clara said that evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "Half a century. Best 50 years of my life," Ryder said. He squeezed her hand gently. "I meant what I said back at that lake. I would do it all again, every single day, just for the privilege of loving you." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar solid warmth of him. "You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. You showed me what love could be, what family could be. I will never be able to thank you enough for swimming across that river." "You thanked me every day," Ryder said quietly, "by being my partner, my wife, the mother of my children, by loving me even when I did not deserve it, by building this life with me." He gestured to the ranch spread out before them, to the house they had filled with love, to the legacy they had created together. "This is our thank you to each other. This is what we made." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The river had tried to separate them, the wilderness had tested them, poverty and hardship had threatened to break them, but they had prevailed through sheer determination and unwavering love, proving that sometimes the strongest foundations are built by the most unlikely people. Clara thought about the frightened young woman who had stood on the wrong side of that swollen river so many years ago, convinced she was going to die alone. That woman could never have imagined this future, could never have dreamed that the mountain man who came to save her would become her entire world. She had thought she was lost, stuck, doomed. Instead, she had been exactly where she needed to be to find everything she had been searching for. "Thank you," she said again, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "Thank you," Ryder echoed, and kissed the top of her head with infinite gentleness. They remained on the porch until the moon rose high and bright, illuminating the ranch in silver light. Then they rose together, supporting each other as they had always done, and walked into the house that love had built. Behind them, the creek burbled peacefully, the mountains stood eternal and strong, and the life they had created together continued on in their children and their children's children. The river had tried to keep them apart. Instead, it had brought them together. And from that desperate moment of fear and courage had come 50 years of love, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, proof that sometimes the greatest rewards come from the simplest acts of kindness and bravery. Ryder had swum across a raging river to save a stranger. Clara had trusted him to carry her to safety. And from those two decisions, made in a moment of crisis, had come a lifetime of happiness neither of them had ever expected to find. As they lay in bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for 5 decades, Clara whispered one final truth into the darkness. "You were worth waiting for." "So were you," Ryder replied, his voice rough with emotion. "So were you." And they drifted to sleep together, 2 hearts beating as one, 2 souls perfectly matched, 2 lives completely intertwined. The mountain man and the woman he had saved, the couple who had built an empire from nothing, the love story that had begun on the banks of a swollen river and would last until their final breaths and beyond. This was how love was meant to be. Not easy, not simple, but worth every struggle and sacrifice, built on trust and respect and unwavering commitment, tested by time and hardship, but emerging stronger for it. A partnership in the truest sense, two people facing the world side by side, lifting each other up, carrying each other through the floods and storms of life. Ryder had swum across to carry Clara back over. But the truth was they had been carrying each other ever since, through 50 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy, always together, always committed, always in love. That was the real story. Not the dramatic rescue, though that made a good tale to tell the grandchildren. The real story was in all the quiet moments after, all the ordinary days that became extraordinary simply because they were shared. The sun rose the next morning on the ranch they had built, the family they had raised, the legacy they had created. And Ryder and Clara rose with it, ready for another day together, another chance to love and be loved, another gift they would never take for granted. 50 years and counting, with many more to come if they had their way. Forever stretched ahead of them, bright and beautiful and full of promise, all because one man had been brave enough to cross a river, and one woman had been brave enough to trust him. Their story would be told and retold through generations, inspiring others to take chances on love, to believe in the possibility of finding their perfect match, to understand that sometimes the most important moment of your life happens when you are not looking for it. The swollen river had been Clara's crisis point. Ryder's courage had been her salvation. But what came after was the real miracle, choosing each other every single day for 50 years and beyond, building a love that would outlast them both and live on in the hearts of everyone they touched. This was their happy ending, hard-won and well-deserved. This was what happened when two lost souls found each other in the wilderness and decided to build a home together. This was the power of love, pure and simple and eternal. And as the sun climbed higher in the California sky, painting the mountains gold and the creek silver, Ryder and Clara Anderson began another day of their beautiful, impossible, perfect life together.